Okay, let's get started, and let me first wish you a good morning or even good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to attend today's webcast. Today's webcast is going to be about maximizing your marketing with Cope Funds. Hopefully this is going to provide you with some new ideas. It's going to provide you with some, let's say, good practices. It's also going to provide you with some showcases of how you can actually invest your Cope Funds or use your Cope Funds more efficiently. Now, my name is David Bazik. I'm the managing partner at Consulta. I will be also hosting today's webcast. Now, I do hope you know that this webcast is going to provide you with some new ideas, insights, best practices that can be applied to your market and your marketing efforts. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please post them to the Q&A board. We will monitor the board and will respond to questions at the end of each section. Now, let me first start with a couple of, let's say, troubleshooting tips. Now, if you have any issues with the content stream, please rejoin the meeting. That always helps. Audio will stream via computer speakers. Please check if your speakers are unmuted. Should you hear an echo or a background noise, please put your microphone on mute and or rejoin the meeting. Now, for questions, as mentioned before, please post them to the Q&A board. We monitor the board and respond to the questions. And if for some reason you drop off the call or get disconnected, this also happens in the virtual world, please rejoin the meeting. Now, for those of you who are new to our webcasts, maybe also a quick introduction about who we are and what we are doing. So in the first place, we are a performance marketing agency. We work exclusively with tech industry, so we are not supporting any banks, retailers, pharma. Let's say all of our clients are coming from tech. We are on the side of B2B. We do very little of B2C. I would say 98% of our engagements are about B2B. And at the end of the day, I would say that we are serving the clients from Western Europe, Central Eastern Europe, and Middle East and Africa. Now, I'd say that also with our approach, we are typically taking a bit different routes that our clients are usually used to, but I would say we are in marketing, so we need to differentiate and we need to make sure that we are also different. Now, shift the gears, you know, what are we going to discuss or what I'm going to speak about in the next 35 minutes. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to Cope Funds, what Cope Funds are, then also touch base on the criteria to qualify for Cope Funds, also present a real-life case of effective approaches, so what worked well for some of our clients, how we supported them with that. And at the end, you know, we have, let's say, two a bit wrap-up sessions, you know, like how you should not leave your Cope Funds to chance, you know, because there's, I would say, a lot of funds and budgets out there, you know, so it would be a pity not to use them. And of course, also what are the next steps to maximize your marketing with Cope Funds. So this is, I would say, in a nutshell, what we want to deliver. Now, recently I had a couple of discussions with some of our clients. And of course, they noticed the webcast and they said, okay, I mean, why are you guys even like trying to deliver this? Isn't this something that vendors should be communicating to us? And I would say to some extent they're right, you know, but I would say, I mean, from the other side, you know, that since we, of course, are quite often, you know, involved, you know, in projects that are co-funded by Cope Funds, that sometimes, you know, the way how partners are using those also influences, you know, what we do and how we do it. So what we realized, I would say, in the last couple of years, you know, that some partners simply don't have a good understanding about what Cope Funds are, how they could be used. Then second very important reason, you know, why we decided to run this session is also that sometimes since, let's say, the partners or the companies we work with, so they don't want to kind of, let's say, how to say it properly. Sometimes, you know, the bureaucracy or the admin that is associated to Cope Funds simply, I mean, in, of course, partners' eyes, you know, it does not justify the usage. Sometimes we also end up in a lot of bureaucracy or even in trouble because somehow the partners did not check, you know, well, the intended usage of funds, you know, like, and how this can be spent or how this can be invested. So this kind of then creates a huge admin overhead. A lot of budgets also end up unused, which is a pity, because I think that, I mean, if the money is out there, then, I mean, it's a pity that it's not, let's say, properly invested, of course, in generating some quality outcomes. And of course, I also believe that there is a huge opportunity to do more and better with co-funds. So that's, I would say, the last reason why we decided to run this session. Now, some of the recent discussions I had with vendors about different vendors about co-funds, like I really kind of was impressed by the statement by one vendor, which basically said that based on their records, almost 50% of co-funds end up unused. So it's basically somehow the money that different partners are entitled to, or let's say the investment monies different partners are entitled to, but it simply end up unused because timelines are not met. Partners do not submit their claims on time. Sometimes they're even not aware, that there's something, let's say, on the record for them. And this is, I mean, hopefully, let's say after today's session, this number is going to be lower, it's going to start decreasing, and that's also the main intent of the session. Now, let's start with the basics. So what are co-funds? In the first place, these are basically IT vendor. It's not just, I mean, limited just to IT vendors, but let's say I want to kind of keep focus on the world where we are playing our game. It's basically IT vendor funds, let's say officially called cooperative funds, which are basically provided to channel partners. And this can be resellers, distributors, system integrators, ISVs, to basically support joint marketing or let's say or promotional activities. Now, these funds also have different categories. I mean, sometimes funds are allocated to advertising, sometimes it's basically events, could be promotions, sometimes it's even creating sales materials. Now, the ultimate goal of these cooperative funds is basically to, of course, to drive new business. So let's say things that are related to driving new business, I mean, not all of them, but many of them are actually kind of qualify for co-funds for different initiatives that vendors are attaching to co-funds. Now, what is very important is that, of course, there are certain rules and there are certain, let's say, criteria that has to be met in order to qualify for such funds. And sometimes there is also, not always, but sometimes there is also pre-approval needed. So you cannot just blindly start. I mean, you see that there's like in your partner portals, that, I mean, there's some good numbers that are waiting for you. There are some funds that are available, but sometimes, there's also pre-approval needed from the vendor to make sure, that actually the activity that you're planning qualifies well. And of course, the activity can be co-funded by co-funds. Now, the last thing where there is also a bit of a, let's say, sometimes hassle, with bureaucracy, with over reporting, is that co-funds are typically offered on a reimbursement basis or on a reimbursement basis, which basically means, like that you don't get the money up front, but you need to invest your own money. And then once the marketing activity is approved, you would submit your claim for reimbursement. So basically, you're going to submit your claim to the vendor, and the vendor is going to reimburse you for the part that has been agreed. So typically, it's not 100%. Now, in short, like what are some typical areas, and I'm going to kind of focus more, let's say, on GTM or let's say new business generation. So the number one is basically marketing, like what are different type of activities that qualify. So it's marketing and lead generation. So digital marketing campaigns, it could be events, it could be webinars, it could be, even as mentioned before, collateral development. So basically you would kind of, submit a claim, to prepare your nice brochures, like one pagers, data sheets, sales pitch decks, etc., etc. Then the second category is basically sales and technical enablement. There's a bit of an error. It's not technical, but technical enablement, which is about sales trainings, which is also about certifications, sometimes also demo equipment, some licenses to allow you to kind of run some demos, POCs. But of course, it can be also technical training and certifications in case, where, of course, there's a stronger need of technical resources to be involved, in pre-sales, in sales process. So this is also something that can be co-funded with co-funds. Then, of course, it's customer engagement, different customer incentives, different promotions, loyalty programs for repeat purchases. So in a way, like everything that would drive, everything, things, that would drive future sales, net new client acquisitions, upsell. And the last but not least, is also channel development. So for example, in case of distributors, partner recruitment, joint go-to-market strategies through partner marketing. So all these things, of course, these are type of activities or let's say most typical areas, where vendors would be co-funding, the activity through co-funds. Now, what are some key steps? And I'm like, for some of you, this might be oldie but goldie, you already heard about that, but I just want to, because I was checking, the registrants for today's session. I see that there are some companies that are fairly new to COP, some companies that are already leveraging this, but there are some key steps, and these key steps are somehow important not to end up with a huge headache. Now, first one, is make sure that when you actually notice or when you are informed that there are some COP funds available to you, that you basically check the program documentation. So it's basically, marketing development funds, like the documentation to check, especially, let's say, in the areas that speak about timelines, when funds have to be consumed, what are type of the activities that are supported by the funds, what's the proportion of funding, is it 50-50, is it 100%, is it 30-70, because all of this is typically also not just mentioned, but described in MDFs. So once you see that, somehow, the timelines are okay with you, work for you well, that the requirements, the type of activity that is pretty much co-funded makes sense for you, then of course the second step is creating a plan where you outline the activities you intend to fund. Now, this does not need to be a 40-pager, a plan, where you get a couple of thousands of euros or dollars of investment. You don't need to kind of prepare a thesis, out of the play. But what vendors, of course, will check and what they're looking for, I would say it's a couple of, let's say, KPIs, okay, so how do you plan to fund this? What is going to be the breakdown? What is the activity that you're going to run? How much do you plan to spend for different subcategories? Because if you say, look, I want to run a 5K campaign and I'm going to spend 4K on building the content, that will kind of raise some questions. Then, of course, at the end of the day, the timelines, how you plan to do it. Do you plan to do it on your own? Do you want to involve the agency? And last but not least, a super important one, what are the KPIs? And even here, I would get back, to the number one. Typically in the program documentation, there are mentions of key KPIs, like what the vendor for this particular initiative is interested in. It's not always just qualified leads. Sometimes, it's also going to be reach. Sometimes, it's going to be, I don't know, like something that, let's say, maybe some a bit softer criteria. But at the end of the day, of course, they want to see, what is going to be the ROI of such investment. Now, number three, it's basically preparation and submission of a formal proposal. So this is like, besides, just the plan of the activity, of course, there's some other admin, or let's say some other documentation that has to be submitted, some contracts, like you need to kind of sign some, quotes, they're basically different, but I would say that typically the plan is where things kind of get stuck a bit. Now, then, of course, it's about executing, it's about delivering the motion, let's say delivering, or executing, the initiative according to the agreed upon plan. So, there are always, in marketing, we would have some deviation left or right, but like the idea is that if we are sailing in one direction, and this is the direction that, of course, is also co-funded by co-funds, that we should not kind of navigate away. Now, Number 5, very important one, is tracking the performance of the funded activities, collecting data on key metrics. Now, why is this important? I mean, coming again back to the point number 2, it kind of also boils down on how you actually did the setup, because if there are a couple of KPIs, and there are always a couple of KPIs you need to monitor, and your campaign setup or tools that you're using for that are not supporting that, then of course you're going to end up in trouble. And last but not least, like a very important part of let's say co-funding, or co-funding, or let's say delivering, projects that are co-funded. I mean, it's evaluating the overall success of the campaign and also report back. Now, what partners typically say, when we have discussion about, okay, why wouldn't we use some COP funds for this activity? Say, hey, you know what? I mean, either we don't want to go into all this admin hassle, preparing the plan, submission of proposal, contracts, etc., and on top of that, also do a lot of reporting, and let's say everything that is associated with that. So, but at the end of the day, that's the rule of the game. So it's not about whether we can avoid this, but how we can be smarter with preparing everything that has to be prepared up front, and also preparing everything that comes afterwards. Now, what are common criteria for qualifying? And this is, I would say, probably the most important thing to check, when you actually get presented, with the option of co-funding, is like, what is the criteria, that needs to be satisfied in order to, at the end, get your reimbursement. And I can tell you, we work with more than 100 clients on a yearly basis, and many cases, also COP fund claims get rejected, since they are, some criteria is not being satisfied. Now, I already mentioned before, campaign proposal, and here I want to show you how we can get a bit smarter, or how we can get a bit faster with let's say, administrating, all the bureaucracy that is associated to COP funds. Now, in a nutshell, there are like 3 things: campaign proposal, where you kind of also indicate what you plan to do in your campaign; budget and resource plan, what you're going to do on your own, of course, with a fair evaluation of the cost of such activity; what you're going to do, I don't know, with your agency; what is going to be provided by third parties. Then it's metrics and reporting plan. So how are you going to monitor and measure the KPIs? And of course, at the end of the day, it's pre-approval. Now, just a couple of ideas. And, I was once told, by my manager, that when you don't have time or money, use your brain. And I'm going to add here something else: use some templates. So typically, when you check MDFs, for COP funds, there's always a big proportion of criteria that is fairly standard. And then, depending on different programs that are funded with COP funds, of course, there's some differences, in terms of the KPIs requested, etc., etc. So if you are in a position that very much depends, from let's say, from a partner to a partner, that COP funds are provided to you by different vendors that work with on a regular basis, then it makes sense to start operating with some templates. Or I would even say, start working with someone that has such templates. So for example, campaign proposal. What are, let's say, key elements of a campaign proposals? Okay, it's about defining the objectives, it's defining the target audience, it's defining the channel strategy. So how are you going to use different channels, where you're going to advertise, and at the end of the day is a timeline. Now, of course, for each and every campaign, this might be a bit different, but the outline, how the proposal or the strategy document looks like, could be the same. So I can tell you, in, let's say, full transparency and honesty, we have this nice template that we built some time ago, where we are just changing the numbers, where we are just changing the timelines, where we are just changing the channels, but all the rest, the outline is fairly the same. So it's actually a very quick exercise for us to prepare such proposal. Now, of course, there is no reason why you could not operate with something like this. Then the second one is key elements of a budget and resource plan. I'm just kind of like I did a screenshot of one of the quotes that we would typically send out, which kind of has a detailed cost estimate. Then it also clearly indicates how much of the budget is going to be spent for different type of activities, and also justification, of this expense. So it basically typically comes on 2 pages. Now, if you look on this breakdown that is on the right hand of the slide, I mean, if let's say you work a lot in digital marketing or performance marketing, you kind of realize that there are always same categories of services that are being considered for different campaigns, is just in different proportions. So sometimes content is much bigger because simply, there is no available content in place. So we need to copyright more. Sometimes, like we need to kind of set up more web assets. Sometimes we need to set up more tools. But at the end of the day, the categories are the same. And again, this is another example of the template that you can basically build on your own, or you work with an agency, you work with us that is going to support such template. And again, this is going to save a lot of time, and also later on when you are reporting, like back to the vendor, it's going to kind of, save you from any headaches of things not being compliant. Now, the third one, typically the most difficult one, is basically metrics and reporting plan. Now, what vendors typically request and require is KPIs. How are you going to track those KPIs? How are you going to report back to us? Is it going to be once per week? Is it going to be at the end of the campaign? So in a way, there are different requirements set. But again, with some, let's say, effort, and if this is something that could be useful once per quarter, it's worthwhile of building a KPI calculator or profitability calculator, where you will be able, by again using the template, you will be able, to kind of enter the required KPIs, business objectives, etc., and then run it through the calculator, maybe even prepare a couple of scenarios, ABC, or different simulations, of expected outcomes. Now, why is all of this important? It's not just about satisfying the admin, it's not just satisfying, some criteria that somebody else imposed. This also kind of, I would say, shows, because you have to understand it's not only you that is submitting claims, but this, at the end of the day, when people are, let's say when the representatives, when they're confirming the claims, such breakdown also to some extent indicates that you understand what you're doing, that you have clarity, that you know what you need to measure, how you need to measure, how things should, that you understand how things should be done. So it's not just about satisfying the admin requirements, it's also about showcasing that you're on top of the activity, which of course also gives a good, message, to the approver or the pre-approver of your project. Now, there's a lot of bureaucracy to handle, so make sure that you use templates. That's the first one, and this is going to save a lot of time, and I'm going to show you now on a particular example of the client how much we actually saved by repurposing some stuff, by recycling some stuff, or find someone who has them. Look, if you work with an agency and the agency is not supporting you with such admin, because you have to understand, and I'm like maybe also spitting a bit in our bowl, that as an agency, when you work with tens or hundreds of clients, of course, you have, to some extent, you have the economy of scale. So it makes even more sense, to actually build such templates, and of course also support your clients with such templates. It's much cheaper for the agency than the client at the end of the day. So make sure that, again, if you are heavy consumer of COP funds, start preparing some templates. If not, if you kind of more work through the agencies, like you outsource this out, make sure that the agency is supporting you with that. Okay, a real life case of effective approaches. Now, I'm just going to outline a bit the client situation. So an IT services reseller with 50 plus employees, so not a huge partner, a huge organization, offering core services such as cloud migration, infrastructure management, modern workplace solutions, security, and of course the related managed services, so an MSP. Now, they don't get, let me put it this way, not that they don't get it, let's say, but they are not getting COP funds in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of euros or dollars. But still, you know, I mean, based on the sell or resell that they do, you know, there is something that is landing in their account on a quarterly basis. Now, and let's say for this particular case that I want to explain, they were entitled to 1.5K in quarterly COP funds. The vendor required a 50% match, and they have very limited internal marketing budget. Now, in all reality, you know, with 1.5K, considering the media spend, you know, like you cannot do a lot, especially in their market. Now, of course, if you match it with 1.5K from your end, that already opens some additional options. Now, in the first place, they were concerned about and also frustrated when we started discussion by the administrative requirements imposed by the vendor. Said, look, for 1.5K, you know, and we are very limited, you know, with our marketing resources. I mean, somebody's probably going to spend a couple of days on preparing all the admin. So, I mean, it's simply, I mean, there is no math, you know, that would say, hey, yes, it's worthwhile going after something like this. Even like in their words, I'll be very transparent, for a marketing activity where we don't know whether there is going to be a positive outcome. Now, eventually they said, okay, let's go for it. Now, what are some must-haves? I mean, whenever you're running a B2B digital campaign, digital marketing campaign, okay, there are, let's say, 6 key elements. The first one is the content. I mean, this is not just ads, but it's also the message on the landing page, email messages, downloadables. Then, of course, is design, making sure that everything is aligned to your brand. Then, of course, you also need web pages that are going to host some downloadable content or some registration pages. Then you need to have active promo channels. Let's say if you want to advertise on LinkedIn, also need to have an active LinkedIn company page. You need media budget. I mean, with organic, it's going to be very hard unless you're the star of the market to actually drive conversions. And at the end of the day, sorry, you need some reporting tools. Now, for this particular partner, we kind of decided that we want to run this with the highest degree of efficiency, because typically co-funds are associated, let's say, to some shorter marketing. You would run something for 1 month, 2 months, potentially 3 months, which is a quarter. So, okay, let's try to repurpose as much as we can. Let's also try to use as many templates as we can. And at the end of the day, let's only prepare some things, you know, that are, I mean, must prepare. Okay, now the first one, I must prepare to, I mean, to submit a claim for COP funds is basically campaign plan, budget breakdowns and projections, what I was showing to you before. So this is something where you cannot, like, I mean, not just copy paste from a different partner. However, for all of that, we use some templates that we had. Then what also needs to be custom, or let's say set up ad messages, making sure that we also use their narrative, the way how they want to communicate their offering. Then media budget, you cannot optimize or repurpose this category. I mean, LinkedIn is going to charge their share, you know, one way or the other. And of course, we also needed some, let's say, a light version of marketing automation platform. So these are things that cannot be repurposed, recycled, you know, like to some extent, you know, you need to kind of work on that partner by partner. However, we actually had also a long list, I mean, say a decent list of repurpose. So all downloadables that were used were basically sourced from vendors library. Vendors are providing all this content. It's just about do a bit of a search, you know, like and use basically what works, you know, with the campaign you would like to run. Now for landing pages, we used a template, a layout, a templated layout. We just colored it, you know, like with the right branding colors, you know, making sure that at the end of the day, it kind of feels theirs. Translations, now I'll be very honest here, we use ChatGPT. So for all translations that were done in the campaign, we use ChatGPT, and then client did minor edits that were needed, but these were minor edits. Save some money, save some time. We also had templates for click engagement, conversion forecasting, ROI calculation, some of what I showed before. And we also use some standardized reporting templates. Now, what were the savings, direct savings, in money, like considering translations, considering design? 1.1K. Time savings, 8 hours. And we calculated this jointly with this partner. Now, what were the outcomes? I mean, we were basically running modern work and infra campaign, let's call it this way. SMB targeting, EMEA region. I will not point out the country specifically. It was localized campaign, so basically it was not in English, it was in a local language. We had 1 conversion assets, a lot of pro materials advertised through LinkedIn, approximately 2 weeks of preps, or let's say 10 days of preps, and 1 month net promotion. What was the cost for the partner? 2.9K, including media budget. Everything basically was included in that. Now, LinkedIn was used as a primary engagement channel here. Also, engagements took some time to pick up, which is quite typical for LinkedIn. Few rounds of target audience optimization, 33K impressions, 26 leads. Cost per lead was less than 40 euros. Now, in partners' eyes, a successful campaign. Could we do better? Always. Could we have nicer looking pages? Always. Could we have better, or let's say nicer looking ads? Always. But I would say for what has been available in terms of the budget, but also time, I would say it was more than good enough to satisfy partners' criteria, but also vendor scope criteria. And that also brings me to my last point about this case. It's not always necessary, to kind of try to, let's say, build a super fancy car, drive it for 1 month, and then you simply push it over the cliff. In such short-term marketing, and this is the case in, let's say, 90%, or let's say this would be the case in 90% of COP-funded engagements, like I would say, that it's more about being smarter, fast, repurposing, recycling, than trying to do everything from scratch, and then run it for a month and then just leave it there. And again, this thought, let's say this point is made for short-term marketing, which is like 1 to 3 month campaigns. Of course, when you get COP funds, or when you utilize your COP funds to run things ongoingly for a year or even longer, it's a different story. But that's less than 10% of how COP funding is typically spent. And I just wanted to also give you an example, because this has been the model that has been used with this particular partner, that we as an agency, since, as I said, we identified some challenges with COP funding, we also prepared or have prepared some of the packages that kind of fit such narrative, where we are doing a lot of repurposing, we are doing also a bit of a templating, and at the end of the day, making sure that we can meet the budgets that are available even when funds are really small. It's very easy, not easy, it's easier to work with bigger funds or with bigger budgets. But when you kind of are operating with smaller ones, then of course you need to be much smarter. And this is basically one example. We have so-called campaigns in a box, light plan. This is also what we were running with this partner. You see that we are also giving some commitments about the results, 15 MQLs for this partner. It was 29, even better. Also, the media budget was a bit higher than 1K that is included here. But that's something, that can actually, I would say, it fits really well the client, or let's say COP narrative. Now, at the end of the day, my thought, for closing this reference case, would you buy a custom car, drive it for 1 month, and then push it over the cliff? And this is how 80% of marketing funds are typically spent, not just COP, but marketing funds, where we have clients say, look, we want to run something for 2 months. But then, we kind of spend just too much time, too much money, too much effort on navigating some details, whether the picture of the landing page should be on the left or right, which at the end has a very, very little or small impact, on the, to the end result. Now, how not to leave your COP funds to chance. This one is going to be very short, but to the point. There are like different reasons, and these are, the reasons, these 8 reasons that you have here, these are basically based on our records. So when we were contracted by a partner, by an IT company to run a campaign, a program, an initiative, that was co-funded by COP funds. And they kind of at the end, when reporting back, there were some challenges that, in most cases were successfully managed, but in some cases it was a big longer battle. Now, non-compliance with vendor guidelines. So this is like, it's not just about timelines, it's not just about how you actually broke down your proposal and then not kind of having full compliance to that. But sometimes, it's also like, it kind of boils down to mechanics of your campaign. And I just give you a very simple example where you say, you know what, we actually got, dear vendor, thank you very much for these funds, or co-funding. Now here is my report. We actually did even better. We did not reach out only to 500 prospects over the phone. We actually reached out to 1,000. And then the vendor asked, how did you obtain their phone numbers? And it could be the same story for email. I say, yeah, we just kind of bought a database that was available through a company that kind of, we found, and they kind of sold us this database of phone numbers. But we say, okay, but did you check whether this is compliant with local privacy regulation and legislation? And I can assure you that almost every country has something like this in place. And that's also something, that could be seen, and not could be, but is seen as non-compliant. So it's not just about how you report, and the format of your reporting and KPIs. It can also boil down to mechanics of your campaign. Now, incomplete or inaccurate documentation, okay, that is something that is easily fixable because you can, to some extent, get back, you kind of do some kind of amendments, additions, and like that's manageable. Delayed submission, very critical. When vendor requires that all the documentation has to be submitted by 27th of September, which is, let's say, 3 days before the end of the quarter, and you submit on 5th of October. And I can tell you, I was personally involved, in let's say some projects, where vendor then rejected the funds, the COP funds. So it's like, it's a serious, let's say, topic, deadlines are deadlines, and we have to make sure that we meet them. Now, budget overruns, or the discrepancies. So, okay, sometimes I would say these overruns, are even approved, but not that often. So we need to make sure that we kind of stay within the limits that have been set. Now, lack of clear communication. This is also something, okay, you promised that you're going to report on a weekly or monthly basis, but then you didn't. Things have not been clearly communicated. Failure to meet performance metrics. You promised 30 qualified leads, ended up generating 10. So that's also something. Now, legal and compliance issues. To some extent, this one has been mentioned before. And there's discrepancies in COP fund usage. So if COP funds were given for digital marketing campaign, or let's say for sales demos, you cannot run a digital marketing campaign. Simple as that, So like this is also something, that at the end of the day, it's important. And of course, we need to be proactive and diligent here. You can minimize these common issues by, making sure, that you are, making sure that you kind of follow the rules, or, you simply outsource the process to the agency. That's, I would say, also something that I want and I need to mention here. Now, maybe a couple of words about the agency or, in my opinion, what should be part of the agency engagement where the agency is engaged in projects that are co-funded by COP. So campaign plan, that should be a standard element that should be provided by the agency. Budget plan, I mean, if the agency does not prepare a budget plan by default, with a breakdown of the numbers, KPIs, how can the agency advise on the ROI? And that's actually a bit of a food for thought. How can someone say, hey, I'm going to generate 50 leads for you, if they are not able to kind of present the breakdown of the KPIs that lead to such ROI calculation? Then it's metrics and KPIs, projections on cost per clicks, cost per lead. No, I mean, if you're not getting this from your agency, change the agency. And again, I might be also spitting in our own bowl, you know, but like that's my, let's say, that's my view, you know, not just you, but that's pretty much how I see things, you know, in the agency relationship. Weekly reporting with on-demand access to performance data, so that you can not just report back to the vendor, but you can also follow up on a weekly, at least on a weekly basis, on the leads that are being generated. Compliance, I mean, I mentioned this one, like all these ideas, you know, that you might get, or let's say, not ideas, but suggestions, you know, that you would get, you know, from some of the agencies, like, why don't we just buy an email database, run an email campaign? Yes, we can, but we can also end up fined. So that's out of the question. And of course, POEs, that's also something that the agency should provide. So all these 6 categories is what, in my opinion, in my view, and I strongly believe in that, should be part of the agency service when, of course, you're engaging with the agency to run a project for you. Now, next steps. Before I move to the next steps, I just want to review the questions because I saw that there were a couple of questions that popped up. Just give me a sec. Okay, there were a couple of questions about the recording. Yes, we are going to, I mean, we are recording this webcast and it's going to be shared with you after the session, not immediately after the session, maybe a day or two. Just need to make sure that we kind of publish it, let's say, to the right share. Now I see that, okay, so there's that one very good question, you know, and I like your thinking, you know, like, can we as an agency handle just the bureaucracy and admin around the COP funds? And then, of course, leave, you know, the partner to run the activity on its own. So basically the question, if you're providing such service, I mean, not right now or currently we don't, but he actually gave me a very good idea. So thank you very much for asking this question. Typically, we would be kind of supporting, you know, the service, you know, let's say the project with all this admin, bureaucracy, reporting services, when, of course, we are also contracted for the execution. And like, there's another question that I see here. Okay, what is the minimum budget for the campaign? I'm assuming, you know, that you are referring to the digital marketing campaign. It also includes like media spend or media budgets. So look, I mean, it very much depends on the market. I mean, you have some minimums, you know, for example, on LinkedIn, if you want to run some ads on LinkedIn, I mean, LinkedIn would basically charge, I mean, we have like a minimum budget of 10 euros, or let's say $10 per ad per day. Now, if you want to run 3 ads, $30, let's say, per day. If you run this for a month, even let's say the LinkedIn cost is going to be at least 900. Sometimes in some markets can be a bit lower, in some markets going to be a bit higher, but just to kind of provide you with some ranges. But I mean, it's very hard to say what is the minimum cost. We've been running campaigns from 1.5K to, on the other side, much more. It also very much depends on how much do you already have at hand. What are the assets, you know, that you have at hand? Are there any things that can be repurposed? So it's very hard to give like a very precise number, but there's always a way, you know, I mean, there's always a way on how to run the campaign. It very much then, I mean, boils down like to what are the expectations. If you have the expectations to generate 100 leads and you have 1,000 euros at hand, that probably is not going to work. Because simply the cost per lead, you know, I mean, on different social networks is higher than that. Now, okay, I mean, these were the questions. There are also some questions about the screen, but I see that the admin already fixed that. I mean, the stream, so the admin already fixed that. So thank you very much for your questions. Now, just to wrap it up, how to cut the cost of your marketing in half with COP funds, because most of COP funds are covering half of the investment. Now, first, that's a bit of a homework. Check your vendor portals for unused or pending COP marketing funds for 2024. So this is where, I mean, you would be surprised that sometimes some partners even don't check this or this, some they kind of realize they don't have access, they need to ask the vendor for the access. So even these are some, let's say, rare, but there are some cases of that. Now, second one, book a call with our strategist. Now, what we can commit to support you with is we can actually prepare, I mean, once, of course, you provide the brief, we can prepare a campaign plan. And we are going to do this for free. Now, how can you actually book a call with our strategist? Just go to our webpage. There's a big, I think it's red button which says talk to a strategist, and you can book a slot there. Now, we are actually offering only 3 slots because there's also some free lunch that we're giving here. Preparation of the campaign plan, even by using different templates, it takes some time. And we are going to be pretty much, I mean, this is available on a first come, first served basis. So first 3 that are going to book that are going to get this for free, no strings attached. Now, of course, if you decide to also proceed with us, I mean, with the delivery of the activity, with the execution of such activity, then what we can commit to that we are going to maximize your COP usage and deliver tangible results. Now, once we're going to understand a bit better what the project is about or what the campaign is about, then we can also, of course, provide some projections about those tangible results. Now, if we see, based on your brief, that we cannot help, then we simply won't proceed to step forward. We say, okay, this is the campaign plan, but I mean, with our approach, with the budget is available, we cannot support it. So we're not going to play poker. Now, last but not least, if you're doing fine, if let's say all things are to some extent under control, you don't need any support with COP, we don't need any support, with marketing execution, feel free to check some of our ideas, resources at the link that is presented here. Again, you'll also get the recording after the session, so you can copy it there, where we are sharing, I mean, also this webcast is going to be published there, the recording is going to be published there, but where there are like different topics that we kind of deliver on a monthly, bi-monthly basis, like from performance marketing, tips and tricks, etc., etc. With that said, I would like to thank you for your time. Also apologize for running this for 5 minutes over the scheduled time, but hopefully you kind of got some fresh ideas, some new insights that, again, are going to help you to kind of improve the efficiency in the first place of your COP spending, of your COP budgets, and not just spending, of course, what is even more important, improve the efficiency and the results of the activities that are being co-funded with COP funds and, of course, also your direct funds. Now, you also have my email here. If there are any questions, comments, you want to discuss this further, feel free to shoot me an email. Other than that, as I mentioned, talk to a strategist. It's kind of, I mean, this is the fastest way of booking a session with me or any of my colleagues where we can continue the discussion, and discuss, whether there are any services, whether there are any topics, that would actually, I mean, where we could add some value, where we could actually support you further, and again, maximize, the outcomes, of your marketing investment. Thank you very much for your time. Once again, pleasure hosting you on our webcast, and I'm looking forward to meet you at any of our upcoming webcast activities or, let's say, direct discussions that we might have. Have a great rest of the day. Talk to you soon. Goodbye.